Hey everybody, what's up? It's Casey's on the case, or Casey Holton, or whatever it is that you know me as. So this is my first attempt at long form content. I am going to be putting out some podcasts and other YouTube stuff. And if you've been following me over on TikTok, you know this has kind of been a long time coming, and I keep saying it's done and then it doesn't happen. So what is this show going to be? Who is this for? It is for really, I hope, anybody of all levels of soccer or footy fandom, but particularly as we come into the Olympics this week, this episode is for folks who maybe have not paid attention and you are just coming back and want to know what you have missed. So we're going to go through every group. We're going to go through the rosters. We're going to go through players that you know, players you maybe don't know. We're going to just talk about all of it. You may also, I'm not sure yet if I'm going to be able to edit it out, but Gustav, my pug, is right next to me. So if you hear what sounds like rumblings or snoring, it's because there is a snoring dog next to me, and I've been gone all weekend and don't frankly have the heart to tell him to get out of the room. So he's going to be here with me. Normally also here with me on this podcast, I will have a co-host, but I really wanted to get this out to you, and we were trying to lay out the schedule, and it just wasn't going to be viable to get this done, unfortunately, before the Olympics started with both of us at the same time. So other thing I just kind of want to say as we get started here is that part of the reason this project has taken so long to start is because the previous times I've taped, I felt very stilted. I felt very... I like to bounce off of somebody. If you've ever been on my lives on TikTok or like just watching me respond to questions there, I like having something to respond to. And the previous times I taped this, I just kind of felt like it just didn't feel like me, and it felt very uncomfortable and awkward. And I have a lot of awkwardness too with the editing and just discomfort there. So we got to do it anyway. It may feel a little bit uncomfortable and it may not feel like my normal content. So thank you for bearing with me. And I'm hoping if I just kind of like name the thing that I am less awkward as this goes, but we are going to see. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's do a quick recap of the World Cup in 2023, just in case you missed it. Spain won that one. And then had a whole hell of a lot of drama with their federation. Coach is gone. Federation president is gone because he assaulted Jenny Hermoso. So that team is still largely intact. They look good. They are the favorites for this Olympics. So that element here has not changed. What you are going to find if you are new to the Olympics and you're somebody who kind of tunes in every few years, that I think is really marked this Olympics, is it is a small tournament. So there's only 12 teams, only 3 teams from Europe, one of which is, of course, the host nation, France. So that means that the other World Cup finalist, England, is actually not in the Olympics. They did not qualify. Your only teams from Europe this tournament are Spain, France, and Germany. So if you're looking around at this tournament wondering, I keep hearing people asking where Sweden is, which is like a dagger to my soul as a Swede. Sweden's not there. Sweden didn't qualify. There just were not enough spots here. Neither did Netherlands, who's another, tournament favorite quite often. So they're not there. Is this a weaker tournament as a result? No, this is still going to be an extremely challenging tournament. And we'll go through who is, playing each other, and you're going to see pretty quick. This is not an easy tournament. So specifically with respect to the U.S. women's national team, obviously had a rough World Cup, lost in the round of 16 in penalties to Sweden. This roster looks very different. If you have not tuned into U.S. women's national team since the World Cup, this roster looks different. Probably the biggest talking point for everybody when the roster came out was no Alex Morgan. Is that something we're going to regret? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think so. If you watched the July friendlies, there was a lack of goals, really, and I think that started to concern people. So there's some talk about whether Alex Morgan could have given them more, and we'll get into that more in the full preview, but she is not there. A lot of retirements. Julie Ertz retired, Megan Rapinoe retired. Kelly O'Hara is not healthy, but is basically retired as well. A lot of just folks from 15 and 19 are really gone. So your veteran leadership here on this roster is going to look a little bit different. We also got a new coach. I think you probably all heard about that, but just in case you missed it, the U.S. women's national team is now coached by Emma Hayes, who had been at Chelsea for 12 seasons. This is her first time coaching in the international scene. And we're going to see, because she's only had the team for 6 weeks. So ultimately this hiring was announced back in December. There, were rumblings that she had input, and she was talking to interim coach Twyla Kilgore about, roster decision selection. It has been very apparent since the friendlies in June, where Emma Hayes fully came on board, that while she may have had a hand, I think, a little bit in roster selection and who we were seeing on the teams, because notably there were a lot more players playing in Europe that started getting called into camp. I do think she had a hand in that. But it's very evident by the way she's been taking on these trainings, by the way the team has played at the friendlies. So there's been 4 of them. Been very evident from watching the way that they're playing in these friendlies, been very evident from the way that she and the players are talking about her time there, that she didn't really have quite as much involvement prior to June with this team as I think a lot of us thought. So tempering expectations here. We have a new coach. We've had a new coach for 6 weeks, and we have a lot of players that have not been at that level. So again, we will kind of get into that a little bit more as we preview the U.S. women's national team when we get to their group. If you are not familiar with the Olympics, here is the format. There are 3 groups of 4. It's a round robin. Everybody will play each other once in the group. The top teams in each group advance, the second place teams in each group advance, and then the 2 of the third place finishers from the other groups will advance. You have a total of 8 teams that get out. It is, odds wise, you are more likely to get out of the group than you are to get grouped, so to speak. So the odds of advancing are good. You then play a quarterfinal, a semifinal, and a final. This whole tournament, start to finish, lasts like 2 weeks. It is fast. There's not a lot of time between the matches. These are also very small rosters. That has been very controversial. So that's part of why, we'll talk about it with Brazil, who I think made a lot of really interesting roster choices. They're one of the teams that I think had probably one of the most interesting roster processes besides the US. It's challenging when you only get to have 18 and then you have 4 alternates. What is different this year? So the 2020 Olympics that then happened in 2021 had a lot of exceptions because of COVID. But prior to that, it was an 18-player roster, and you don't get to swap in an alternate once the first match starts unless the player has been deemed to not be able to continue throughout the rest of the tournament. So this year, what has changed is the 4 alternates can actually swap in now for a game. They can't just swap in mid-game. They're not on the bench subs. But if you have a player that is maybe temporarily unavailable for one game that's on your 18-player roster, you can bring in one of the 4 subs. I see that being most applicable if somebody gets COVID or the flu, where they may not be medically available for one match, but they can probably get them recuperated for the next one. A little less applicable with a physical injury, just given how tight the timelines are. I think for the most part, if you get a physical injury in this year, probably out. So what is to stop teams from manipulating the system? I get this question a lot about, if we are in a situation where these alternates can swap in, why would you not just swap everybody in, rotate, have a player sit out who just, needed some load management? And these swaps are not ones that just automatically get approved. The team's medical doctor has to make the recommendation for the player to be unavailable. There is a FIFA medical doctor that then has to also examine the player and make the same decision. And then the IOC, the Olympic Committee, has to then sign off on all the paperwork as well for these teams approving it. So I don't see this system getting gamed with particular ease. I think there's just enough checks and balances here to do it. So don't worry too much about, the swapping out or suggesting that we do it for ourselves, because we're not going to really be able to do it unless we're paying off some doctors. But I don't see that happening for us. So that is the exciting change. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the groups, talk about what to expect from these teams, and go through my predictions for who is advancing out of the group, or at the very least, we're going to go through what places I think everyone is going to finish in. So the first group, Group A, is France, Canada, Colombia, and New Zealand. When this draw first happened, I thought this was the weakest group. It's tied, I think, with another group, but and by weakest, I mean this is still an objectively very challenging group. But New Zealand basically automatically qualifies because they are the strongest team in the Oceanic region, and They only get one qualifying spot. New Zealand qualifies for this every time, and the level is just not quite there. Were they more competitive at this last World Cup in 2023? Yes. They were also the host nation. And so you always are going to have a host nation bounce for the most part there, where there's just an elevated level. I don't expect to see it happen again, especially whenever you have an 18-person roster. Lack of depth, you're going to get punished real fast, because it's hard enough if all 18 of those players are really strong to figure out how to rotate. It is even more so. It's just really challenging if you've only really got like a strong starting 11 and then everybody else has a drop off. And I do think that is the case with New Zealand. So that is really why I think folks were talking about this as the weaker group. France, host nation, their starting 11, for me, it might be the strongest starting 11 in this tournament. They have a fantastic backline that is really growing chemistry-wise with Wendy Renard, with De Almeida, and they look great. They're flowing really nicely together. Their midfield is strong. Their forwards like Katoto, Diani, like these are strong players. The problem is that once you get outside of that first starting 11, I do think there is drop off. I don't know how I became Amandine Henry's biggest hater. I don't understand how it happened to me, but I am. Amandine Henry, when she started in this most recent round of qualifiers against Ireland, like I know Ireland is really excited about their 3-1 win over France in the qualifiers last week, but you had the weaker midfield, and Ireland has a very strong midfield as it is. Amandine Henry should not be seeing meaningful minutes, but she will have to with only 18 players on this roster. They've got so many other strong players. That's, to me, the concern here is how far can France push it? How can they rotate when their starting 11 is probably the best starting 11 in this tournament? But, the rest of it is not amazing. Then you have Canada, who, of course, are your returning gold medalists. A little controversial. They didn't really score goals last Olympics, which, as you kind of see with tournament format, you don't really have to do, because you need scoring goals to get you out of the group. But if even third place can get out of the group, you don't really have to score goals. And then once you're out of the group, like, you can draw. You can completely sit back and defend and win on penalties. It's risky. I don't recommend it, but it could happen. And that's kind of been the criticism of Canada from last Olympics. Very defensive team. Canada this Olympics is still an incredibly strong team defensively, probably the best defensive team in the tournament, but that attack is working now. So that attack is fun to watch. I like the attack. Canada is, for me, a team that I think is actually built to have a very good tournament. I think a lot of players are healthy that, we weren't really sure were going to be. They've got a good mix of really good veteran presence, again, mostly in the back line, and some exciting folks up top. So Canada is a very strong team in this group. And then, of course, there is Colombia, who were kind of the darlings of the 2023 World Cup. They did not have as good of a Gold Cup back in February and March. And if you've been kind of casual and you didn't pay attention to the Gold Cup, so the Gold Cup was a CONCACAF tournament. We invited a couple teams from CONMEBOL, which is the South American region, to participate and play in that. That included Colombia, that included Brazil. That tournament was really, I think, important for teams because it mirrored the same format as the Olympics, with the 3 groups of 4, with 8 teams advancing, with the very quick timeline. So it was very helpful for teams to prepare in that way. Colombia had players that they held out, players like Mayra Ramirez, who, were not there. I think largely she was not there because they had agreed with Chelsea that she would not go as part of her deal. But they did still have Linda Caicedo. They're a strong team. Again, another, I think, defensive powerhouse, which with a little bit more of a lethal edge on the transition, because you have to just give Linda Caicedo like half an inch and she can cause you problems. So that is going to be really the thing to watch here, is what is happening with, Linda Caicedo, with Mayra Ramirez, who they did not have at the Gold Cup, and I think gives them a very different look. They are absolutely a team that could win this. Do I think they will? Probably not. If we're just being honest, probably not. but they are strong. Again, just I think defensive teams do well in this tournament because you're not going to get punished for the group aspect. And then we already talked about New Zealand, who I'm just not that high on. They just don't have the depth. I'm sorry. And like, I hope they advance out of this group, and I am wrong, but I personally do not see it. So my predicted group ordering here is going to be France, Canada, Colombia, and then New Zealand. That is the order in which I think that they are going to finish. I think that Canada, Colombia, France can all take games off of each other, but France, again, that they're going to start to show some wear. I think later on in the tournament, that drop off between the starting 11, as the starting 11 starts to get tired because you haven't been able to rely as much on other players, I think it's going to be noticeable. But they're the home team. I expect them to come out strong. They want to win something. This has been too good of a team to have not won really any trophies. So they got to come out strong. I think they will. Canada and Colombia, again, with their defensive strength, are both really built to grow into this tournament. So I feel very good about France being in first place out of this group. Canada and Colombia, I could see them going either direction, but I do think Canada is stronger than Colombia right now. They just seem to be vibing at the right time. And then New Zealand, you're going home. We all knew you were going home. Again, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. But like, New Zealand's not advancing out of this group. And that was kind of the reason that this was, again, the easiest group, is because in any of these other groups, all 4 teams have a shot. New Zealand, the drop-off was just too great. So with that, let's get into Group B, which is the U.S. Women's National Team's group. It is U.S. Women's National Team, Germany, Australia, Zambia. Not an easy group. I think a few things have happened in the past few weeks that have made it potentially a little bit easier. So, U.S. Women's National Team, this roster looks different. Again, Alex Morgan getting left off, I think, was a big decision. A lot of folks, unhappy to see Corbin Albert included because of her homophobic and transphobic social media posts and what a lot of people see as a lack so far of public accountability and lack of transparency with the fan base there. And I fully understand that viewpoint. I do think just from the midfielders we have, because she was the one we tried out back in February and March at the Gold Cup, and we know that she can work in this midfield, she had to come. If we had tried somebody else out and had somebody else if you got Lily Johannes in February, assuming she was willing to go, because now we're hearing, supposedly she didn't want to come, that she could have been an alternate. I have a hard time believing that, but that's what people are saying, and maybe I don't know exactly what those conversations look like. I get that 16 is young to cap tie yourself, but you don't even have citizenship with the other country yet. So it just seems a little odd to turn it down at that point. But I also get it. We've seen midfielders come into this program and become cap tied and then completely get abandoned very quickly. So if that is a concern, I think it is a valid one. But that's why Corbin Albert is ultimately there, is because we did not have other folks in the midfield that we knew were proven combinations that worked. Something I've been talking a lot about over on TikTok lately and on my lives with midfields is midfields. You can have a player that plays fantastic for a team. You can have a great individual midfielder. But they're a little bit like rom-com chemistry. It's the same way that Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney, it's not great in that movie they did together, right? The chemistry, it feels a little bit dead. And then you watch Glenn Powell and Hitman and you're like, oh, this guy's a star, right? He wasn't any less of a star. He and Sydney Sweeney didn't quite work out. So that is midfields to me, is you have to be your screen testing a little bit, because you can have 2 fantastic midfielders and have them not work well together, which brings us to Lindsay Horan and Rose Lavelle, because that's how I feel about them at this point. Is I think Lindsay Horan, especially for the style that Emma Hayes wants to play, where Emma Hayes is really working with this team on breaking down the low block. And I have videos on what a low block is. If you don't know, they're on my YouTube. And I'll edit it so that there's a link right there or something for that video, if that's helpful. But, Lindsay Horan is good at that. She likes to move off the ball. She likes to get creative with where she is running, what passing lane she's opening up, where she is playing the ball. And Rose Lavelle is a really generational 1v1 dribbler and creates from that. And in your head, you might be thinking, what a cool balance to have two players who play, more of an attacking midfielder role, but in such different ways. What we're seeing on paper so far has been that hasn't clicked. And I understand Emma Hayes wanting to continue to try it, but I haven't seen it work for me. If you missed it, Catarina Macario was named on the U.S. Women's National Team roster. She had to withdraw from the roster due to knee tightness. So it's not another ACL tear, but she had a little bit of discomfort. I think everybody got nervous because she's been out since 2022. She and Lindsay Horan played the midfield together in a very similar way that I think worked. They both are big on off the ball movement, big on a little bit more creativity with the flow there, which, makes sense because they both played at Lyon. So that was working well. Once Macario was out, that's kind of Rose Lavelle's starting spot, one would think, if you're depending on how you're kind of classifying these midfielders. But if you wanted another attacking style midfielder, I do think she's sort of next up. It hasn't looked fantastic. And I do think that kind of calls for reverting back to the Horan, Albert, Coffey midfield that we do know works and we saw work at the Gold Cup. Is that what Emma Hayes is going to do? I don't know. It's very possible that we keep sticking with Rose Lavelle at the 10 because Rose Lavelle's that great. And I understand that. But, I don't think that Lindsay Horan and her, it's not giving the support there that Rose Lavelle really needs for chance creation. So that's a concern there with our midfield. Other players that I think are kind of crucial that I'm a little bit, I'm curious to see how they get involved. Jenna Neiswanger, we've been playing, a lot of in these most recent friendlies, or Emma Hayes has rather, and she gets up really high. And that's great, but it also forces Mal Swanson to invert a little bit more to create that space for Neiswanger outside. And what we're finding is that when Neiswanger is not in, it's kind of a wasted space because Dunn does not push up quite as high as Neiswanger did. So you just end up with Mal Swanson kind of almost crowding the middle there. And I think freeing up Mal Swanson to create chances is the single most important thing the U.S. Women's National Team can do. So other, little news and notes for U.S. Women's National Team, if you have not been paying attention for a minute. The back line probably looks a little bit different than you remember. Julie Ertz retired, like we talked about. Becky Sauerbrunn has not retired, but I will be shocked if we ever see her back with the U.S. Women's National Team. If you missed it, she, got called in to Gold Cup to that roster after Alana Cook got injured. And I think, unfortunately for her, her swan song is going to be a 2-0 loss to Mexico, where she was not equipped to deal with the high press. So we all love Becky. I think she's been an extremely well-liked player within the pool and a fantastic leader, but she's not coming back. It's just not happening. Similarly, I'd be very surprised to see Abby Dahlkemper back again at this point. Abby had a lot more chances after Gold Cup as well to come back, still had some injury trouble. I do think that the Gurma-Davidson center back pairing is long-term where we're looking. Those are two young players. You can play them together for a while. I think Ava Gattino still has a shot at kind of developing and coming into that role, because I do think with her, Gurma and Davidson, you have a really strong 3-back system potentially, but she had kind of a rough back half of the season at PSG and has some growing to do there. So that's just to kind of quickly update you on some people you may know that you haven't seen in a minute, and who are on our roster. Okay, rewind. Okay, so how do I feel about the U.S. Women's National Team roster generally? I'm optimistic about it. I think this is the best roster that Emma Hayes could have picked of the players who had been in the pool and were available. I am a big fan of some of the folks that are alternates here, like Crow Bethune and Hal Hirschfeld, who have obviously both had really great seasons with Washington Spirit. But they're going to be alternates for a reason. You need people who have international experience at this tournament. It's otherwise, with this few spots, it's just really challenging to give one of those spots up for somebody who's a little bit unproven on the national level. You just can't take the risk. 23-person roster, 26-person roster, you can take those kinds of risks, but you cannot do them here. So with that all being said, U.S. Women's National Team, what is the key to success here? We've seen them in these friendlies struggle a little bit with learning the off-the-ball running that Emma Hayes is teaching them that is so crucial for breaking down a low block. And learning to break down that low block is long-term crucial for U.S. Women's National Team, because it is the strategy implemented at the World Cup by most of the teams we face. A low block is a great strategy when you are outmatched and you just need a draw. So not only is it, I think, a strategy you see at the World Cup, I also think it's a strategy that I don't expect to see in the group stage with the exception of Zambia, but it is a strategy you might start to see in those knockout rounds because the draw can force you through to penalties. So we are acclimating to that. I think when we're not playing with the low block, this team looks a little bit different. This team is pretty lethal in the transition if you give them those spaces. Sophia Smith is having a fantastic season in NWSL, as is Mel Swanson. Those are two of the, most on point goal scorers in that league right now. So if you give them those opportunities, they are going to score goals. And when we play Australia, when we play Germany, two teams I think are going to play us more straight up, we should have those chances. But the first match that the U.S. women's national team has is against Zambia. Zambia, of course, their star forward is Barbara Banda, who is currently, for me, the front runner for NWSL MVP. She's playing for Orlando Pride. She is a large reason why they are having such an incredible season at top of the table for NWSL. She has been incredibly difficult to defend this season. She has fantastic breakaway speed, great finishing. And is she a concern here in this group? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I've seen a lot of folks, commentators I respect quite a bit, frankly, freak out a little bit about what our defensive answer is for Barbara Banda. And how are Naomi Girma and Tierna Davidson going to do this? Because we know they've had trouble doing it for their club teams. And the thing I keep coming back to on it is you got to take a holistic approach here. Is it possible they struggle a little bit with Barbara Banda? Yes, absolutely. I think if we keep a clean sheet against Zambia, I'm going to be frankly a little bit surprised. But look at who she plays with at Orlando Pride. It's basically Barbara Banda and like a large portion of the Brazilian national team. She does not have Marta feeding her the ball here at all. So, I could see this one being rough for the U.S. just because it's the first match of the tournament. And again, I don't expect us to keep a clean sheet, but I will be very surprised if the U.S. does not ultimately end up winning this match. Zambia is getting a lot stronger. They are an up-and-coming team, to be sure, but I just don't think they're there yet. And, they didn't have a good World Cup. Did not have a good World Cup, even with Barbara Banda. And it's not like her form got markedly better between last year and now. She's been this good. So I am cautiously optimistic. I think that one is going to go fine. So then you have Germany. Germany, benefited from a weaker qualifying group from Europe. They then got to play in their playoff to gain a spot. An incredibly depleted Netherlands team. Netherlands basically did not have any midfielders. And Netherlands, I think, would have provided the stronger team at this tournament, but there was just no way in that playoff. So Germany now, in addition to already being what I felt very confident was the weakest team coming in from Europe to this tournament, which again, is not really saying much when the other two teams are France and Spain, right? But they were already the team I felt like was going to struggle the most. They got grouped at the World Cup, surprisingly, after a lot of folks had them as their favorites to win. They, got a new coach. They've been adjusting and learning new things. But of course, the biggest blow for them and for their chances was at their Euro qualifiers last week when Lena Oberdorf tore her ACL and MCL. So Oberdorf is probably the best defensive midfielder currently in the world. I don't think that's even controversial to say. That's how much better she is than everybody else. Oberdorf is the complete engine for this German team. And when you watch them play in their Euro qualifiers, and they were already qualified, to be fair, so I think they were trying some different things out, trying to build out of the back against Iceland. But they could not. It's very visible when you watch that game. They could not gain control of that pocket right in front of their central defenders at all. And that's the defensive midfielder's job. And as a result, it was very easy for Iceland to take advantage of any real blunder that Germany had. If you think that Mal Swanson and Sophia Smith are not going to be able to do the same thing, I don't know what to tell you. But I like that matchup for us. The midfield is just not going to be remotely close to the same without Oberdorf. They do not have a replacement for her. I I'm just not that worried about Germany. I've never been. I would be less surprised by us losing to Zambia than I would be of us losing to Germany. And that's our second match in the group is Germany. So I think I don't see Germany may get out of this group. They may get out of this group in third. I do still think they're probably stronger than Zambia, like just in general, but they're not going far. This is just no Overdorf, no party, which is always what I said for France and Wendy Renard. But I'm gonna give it to Germany as well because Overdorf is that important to them. The last team in the group is of course Australia, who had a fantastic run at their own World Cup, making that semifinal. Really just a good showing for them. Home World Cup. This is I think I could say it's a rabid fan. It's like y'all Matilda stands are like big in it. And that's really important and fun. Like I expect they'll have people there. Like they have really, sparked joy in a lot of people. Strong fan base. Sam Kerr obviously out with an ACL tear. So, and maybe if you haven't listened in a while, like Sam Kerr being out might be news to you, but Sam Kerr's out. So that's going to be hard for them. But they played most of the last World Cup with no Sam Kerr. Almost all of it with no Sam Kerr. So they're used to it. And the biggest criticism you can make of Australia when they've had Sam Kerr healthy has been that everything had to flow through her too much. And if a team shut down Sam Kerr, shut down distribution to Sam Kerr, they had no adjustment. So Australia has been working on how to play with or around Sam Kerr and what to do for a couple years now. So I'm not super worried about that for them. I do think that they have a lot of players playing on very tired legs who have not had optimal load management for the season. And maybe I'm more sensitive to that conversation because I am an Arsenal fan and obviously have followed, Steph Catley and Caitlin Ford throughout the season and seen how many minutes they've had to put in. This is a team where I think that their 18 is pretty strong as well. There is some positional drop off. There's a couple of spots where that starter is, it's a decent drop off in the 18, but overall, I think their 18 is pretty solid. This for me is the biggest challenger to the U.S. in this group. Tony Gustafsson obviously also used to coach the U.S. women's national team with Jill Ellis. So he is somebody who is fairly familiar with our player pool and fairly familiar with just, a lot of how we work. Even with Emma Hayes coming in and changing things, there's only so much you can change that fast. So Tony Gustafsson, I think is well equipped to give us a hard time. And this is a team that is going to want something since they kind of came up empty handed at that last World Cup, especially losing, the third place match to Sweden. Sorry, I'm going to gloat about Sweden whenever I can, even though they're not at this tournament. But that being said, I still think the U.S. is going to beat them. And I know these all sound like homer picks. If we get out of these groups and if we go medal, this is all great. I think that there is some pressure off of us a little bit, but just being realistic about what we can do here, we should get out of this group. We should top this group still, I really think. So I've got my predicted order as U.S. Women's National Team first, Australia second, Germany third, Zambia fourth. I do think the rest of the team not quite strong enough yet to support Barbara Bonda. But again, Germany, talk about a position you don't want to be weak at when you're facing Barbara Bonda is probably not your defensive mid, because that's, again, how you're distributing those little balls through, right? So we'll see. I would not be shocked to see Germany be last in this group. That would not surprise me at all. Would not surprise me at all. I do think the 1 and 2 here are going to be the US and Australia. It would surprise me if Zambia or Germany came into those spots. So then let's go on to Group C, the group of death. This is absolutely the group of death. Not close. This is by far the hardest group. It's Spain, Brazil, Japan, and Nigeria. So this is going to be every match here. I mean, I think every match of this tournament's a must watch, but every match of this group is for sure a must watch. And speaking of must watch, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm not going to fix this lighting. We ain't got time today. So this is, it's getting a little artsy maybe even. So let's start here by talking about obviously Spain World Cup winners. I think they are the favorites to win this tournament. That's not even controversial. The thing that I think is probably most exciting for, me as somebody who is pretty familiar with this team, and for those of you who are not, is Patrick Guajaro coming in. She is one of Las Quince. So just as a quick recap, before the 2023 World Cup, there were 15 players who held out and essentially were on strike from the Spanish national team. Some of them ended up coming back to the program. Some of them did not. And this was over just like the way they were in general treated in the program. And a lot of this came to head, with the incident at the 2023 final, and has been to some extent dealt with, but there's been still some tension about whether, some of the last strong holdouts of Les Quince, like Patry, like Mappy Leon, whether they would come back. Mappy Leon, I don't think is fully healthy yet, so that's why she's not here. But this is Patry's first tournament back. She is also a very strong defensive midfielder. Not Lena Oberdorf to me, but I do think very, very strong. And that is a position where Spain did not have a great replacement for her. So, as these teams, I think, start to, more deliberately deal with Spain's tactics. And you saw that when Spain and Japan played the group stage in the 2023 World Cup. The reason that like mid block worked so well from Japan was it allowed them to transition through the defensive mid where there was a weakness there for Spain. So that kind of changes the game plan a little bit for them to have Patry in my eyes, but we're going to get to see how that actually works out. That's, the most exciting person, for me to see back on this roster. So keep eyes out for her. Cause I think you're going to like what you see if you're just, like entertainment. Obviously no other shortage of stars there. They've got this player called Bon Mati you may have heard of, who's pretty good. So Spain looks great. I think Spain will probably top this group, but they're tired. There is expectations. They could end up not topping it. So then your other teams, let's talk about Brazil real quick, because Brazil's roster rather, has changed. There's not that many players from the 2023 World Cup here. If you watched the Women's Gold Cup, did y'all know that Tarciane was not on the World Cup roster? Tarciane, who basically was single-handedly keeping Brazil in that final against the U.S. as the center back. And she's also just got a very memeable, gifable face. She gives great facial expressions. She's now playing for Houston Dash. She is a star, but she was not there at the World Cup. So you have a whole new era of folks getting ushered in. Marta is still there. I think Marta is playing some of the best footy we've seen her play in a while. She's really having fun with Orlando Pride, and I'm excited to see that probably translate for Brazil at this tournament. But she looks great. The most notable and interesting roster decision was that we all saw 2023 NWSL Caroline end up on this roster, who has been SEI designated in NWSL. As far as we knew, that designation has not been lifted because, she tore her ACL. There's been rumblings she was close to coming back, but not rumblings that she was so close to coming back that she could make this World Cup roster. So really cool sign for North Carolina Courage fans. And, if she is healthy, that should really concern everyone at this tournament. She's that good. This midfield gets scary. If she's not healthy, you've got two younger midfielders, Duda Sampaio and Yaya, and I apologize if I'm butchering that pronunciation. Both play together at Corinthians. They are young midfielders who, I will tell you right now, they're either going to have a lights out tournament and become household names, and I won't have to sit here and apologize for knowing how to pronounce their names or not, or they're going to have a really rough go. This is going to be kind of a feast or famine moment for them. Brazil needs their midfield to work in order to have a good showing at this tournament. So I will be excited to see what happens there. The notable roster omission here is Dabinia, who obviously has had some injury trouble at Kansas City Current. Is back, though, and playing. Has not looked as good since coming back from the injuries she struggled with at the beginning of this season. But it is still so interesting to me that we go from, here's a woman who in the 2023 World Cup had her own Nike commercial, and now she's not even on the Olympic roster. So these roster decisions with the small rosters are kind of crazy. It's just very interesting to see that you're leaving her off at this point. A lot of other names folks may be familiar with who got left off. Ari Borges is left off. I think that's probably also an injury issue as well. She's just kind of come back to playing and looking healthy again. So that's been the deal there. But it's Brazil, again, should be a strong showing, but newer roster together, a new coach here as well. Pia Sundhage is, got fired at the end of the last tournament, so she's not playing here. Had a decent showing at Gold Cup. I think relatively looked pretty good, But their midfield, if the midfield is clicking, that midfield, could potentially really carry them through. Then, of course, Japan. Japan had a fantastic showing at the World Cup. I think maybe underperformed from where folks thought they would get after beating Spain in the group stage, losing to Sweden in that quarterfinal. My concern for Japan is the single biggest mistake their coach made the entire tournament was not starting Jun Endo against Sweden. I will die on this hill. Jun Endo starts that match, they beat Sweden. Even as a Swede, I feel like that. The whole match changed in the second half when Jun Endo subbed in. So I think if they start Jun Endo, they don't, have the same issues. But they don't have Jun Endo this tournament either because she has torn her ACL. So if you look at Japan's roster, a lot of turnover there too. A lot of younger players that are going to, either rise to the occasion or not. So it's a lot of pressure. It's a quick tournament. Like, do you grow into it? Do you just hit your stride and, hope for the best? I think in the midfield, I'm probably most curious about watching Momoko Tanikawa, who is a Bayern Munich signing in January. She's been loaned out to FC Rosengård in Swedish, in Damallsvenskan. And she's young. So this is somebody, though, that everybody's identified as having a lot of potential. And does she kind of rise in this tournament and make an impact? I will be very curious to see it. This should be I think this is a strong roster of folks that we maybe just are not super familiar with yet. Japan and just the Asian Confederation in general, that's some of the hardest matches for us to watch. Friendly wise, just online or anything across the year. So it's a little bit hard to say what they look like. They, did not have an easy time qualifying for this tournament, even though they are in what many view to be one of the weaker regions. So who knows? And some of that could just be a regional matchup where when you play teams with a similar style to you, it's harder. And then when you can come in and play against somebody else stylistically, that maybe gives you something different. So we will see about Japan. I'm not super high on them right now, but they're very well coached and obviously have executed very difficult game plans before. So speaking of teams that are well coached, let's go to the last team in Group C. That is Nigeria. Randy is a thorn in that Nigerian Federation side, and he's also a pretty good tactician, as we saw when Nigeria gave England such a hard time last World Cup. The Nigerian team is, for me, Nigeria is the strongest team, I think, coming out of Africa. I think they're much stronger than Zambia. There are a lot of NWSL players on this team. If you look at their roster, I think they have the largest diversity in terms of where folks are playing. They even, I think I'm looking at it again here, but I'm pretty sure, they have a player playing in Russia. They've got players literally playing, in pretty much every league. So that can be good, that can be bad. On the one hand, you don't have players with a lot of time together. But you get a lot of different styles. You get a lot of people who are familiar with different players on other teams. So that is cool. Obviously, if you're an NWSL fan, you are familiar with Oshuala from Bay FC, and she will be one of their big threats. But the player that I am most excited to see what happens for her this tournament is Christy Uchebe. And so Uchebe plays for Benfica. It looks like she's staying there. She seems pretty happy. She's very hyped on them. But I couldn't find information on what her contract situation is. So she's been playing a lot of center back for them. She's also been playing a lot of midfield for the Nigerian national team historically. I have not gone back to watch the match against England and Nigeria, but my recollection is that she is pretty much the reason England had such a bad time in their midfield that match. So, and she's only 24. She's young. So I think for me, she's kind of the standout key player. If she's doing her thing in the midfield, I think she could give Spain a really hard time. So we're going to see. But that all being said, my projected finish in this group is, this is hard. I think this could go in any order. I do feel good about Spain at first. The other three teams, I'm not so sure about. Because again, I just think Brazil and Japan have such new lineups. This could look so different. So I think Nigeria ends up in third either way. And I think it goes badly for either Brazil or Japan. So I'm I'm probably gonna kill myself for this. I'm going Spain, Brazil, Nigeria, Japan. I know I'm gonna get shit because I'm gonna sleep on Japan. And last World Cup, I had Brazil winning the whole thing, and then they got grouped. Although they got grouped in like it wasn't like they got grouped like they were disappointing. It was just a really rough go with France, and then Jamaica came out playing great. So, but I'm gonna choose to maybe be hurt again. I'm gonna pick Brazil. I'm nervous about Japan's youth. I'm nervous about Brazil's youth too, but and again, that's probably bias in the sense that I haven't gotten to watch Japan and I just see their results on paper. And that's, never a good way to make calls or analytics. You got to be able to watch and see what the picture is, but I haven't been able to watch them. So if somebody can make their federation more available to me, I would personally be appreciative, and I can give you all better insight there. Hopefully, maybe. Okay. So, these matches, it's really cool. They all happen on the same days. So the group matches are on July 25th, July 28th, and July 31st. All three groups play on each of those days. If you are on the West Coast, those matches are at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and noon. If you are on the East Coast, that's 10 a.m. Oh, sorry, the East Coast, it's 11 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. So I just take the day off work. Just take the day off work and watch footy. And we'll, of course, give you the full schedule as well over on TikTok. So you can always come and join there. Then your quarterfinals are all taking place on, I believe, August 3rd. Yeah. So August 3rd, the quarterfinals, semis are on August 6th, and your final is on Saturday, August 10th. So this tournament's going to be over before we know it. It should be a really exciting ride. Who are the teams that I think are medal contenders here? My medal contenders are Spain is, of course, the front runner. I think France, home field advantage. Again, concerned about what happens outside of their starting 11. So that is my hesitation with France, but I do think they can medal here. Canada, I think, is built for this tournament. So watch Canada have a good time here again. USA, it's the USA. And I think there is something freeing about the fact that they have a new coach, and that I think there is less expectation in some ways here. There's always going to be expectation to the US, but a little bit less. And then the other teams that I think are more of my dark horses here are Australia. And then I think if I'm wrong about Japan and Japan gets out of the group, I would be watching Japan a little bit. But I think Australia could go. I would watch Japan, and then that's who I have medaling. I'm not as high on Colombia this time. They could, like, any of these teams could medal. This take is probably going to age poorly, but for me, the four that I think are your final four, the way this cooks out, is US, Spain, France, Canada. That's where I think it's going. And you could swap in Australia. I think you could also, again, swap. If I'm wrong about Japan, if Japan gets out of the group, I think it's a different story. So I think if I'm wrong about Japan, I'm big wrong about Japan, and that would not surprise me. So, all right. Thank you for listening. If you've listened this long, if you have questions or things you want to hear me talk about, please let me know. Comment here, subscribe, follow, depending on where you're listening to all this. This is new for me. So anything you want to hear on the show, please let me know. And I'm so excited to have a co-host next time, so that hopefully it's not just me droning on, and also working on having an editor that's not me. So if the editing is funky, it's what it is. And thanks for listening to me and chatting, and listening to Gustav's snoring. So you can, of course, find us on YouTube at Casey's on the Case. It's also where most of my tactical breakdowns live. If you want, if there are any terms you didn't understand during this podcast, I either already have a video up there on it, or it's coming, or just ask me for one and I'll make one. I love teaching basic tactics stuff. And be sure to come join us. I'll be live before, during, and after every U.S. Women's National Team game of the Olympics. We are also going to try to roll these out after each game day and also before each game day, so that we are ideally doing 2 of these essentially between matches, which is a little bit much. So we'll see if we keep to that, but that is the goal. Thank you again for listening and checking us out, and I'll see you next time.